everybody. Welcome to my light box, and welcome to a series of, well, what I think may be a series, if everybody likes it, of identifying finds. I find a lot of stuff, and we all find a lot of stuff that's, we don't know what it is, and it might be cool if we could figure out what it is, but for some things we'll never know, but for a lot of things we can actually ID those and do that pretty accurately. So I decided to do a series, and I'm calling this first one Loops and Clasps, or Loops and Clips. So these are going to be things that look like brass loops, or things that held two pieces together. We find a lot of stuff metal detecting, and I think that honestly it's our responsibility as hobbyists to identify what we find. I've seen, over being on the forums in the early days, American Relic Hunters Forum and TreasureNet and other forums, I noticed that there were a lot of times that people threw things away. I mean, even everything from eagle breastplates and sword hangers and tent rope tensioners and colonial buckles, and I mean, just the list goes on. Great finds that were thrown in the trash. And I would also say that the weirder the thing is, the more likely it is something that's scarce, because if you haven't seen something like it before, it's probably pretty scarce or weird or interesting, or it's one of those things where we owe it to ourselves and to the history of the things we find to identify what we find, and instead of just pay lip service to the history and say, oh, I'm digging history, I'm recovering history. Well, actually get out there and do the work necessary to identify the things that you dig, and it'll be better for your collection, it'll be better for preservation, and to know what you've actually found, and to be able to appreciate the history of it if it's properly identified. So I call this one Loops and Clasps, or Loops and Clips, and we're gonna go through a bunch of different loops and things that are made out of various materials, and hope you enjoy. All right, on with the show. Okay, the first loop that I'm sure that many people have found is this. This is a pocket watch winding key. The iron piece that went in the watch is rusted away, as it is on just every example that you find. These were actually available in many different styles, made of many different materials, everything from gold and silver to most of them are brass, vast majority of them. And often they would be strung on a little keychain. They're on the pocket watch chain. Often there would be a fob there to keep that chain from tangling up, so that the pocket watch could be on a chain and not lost, attached to presumably a button or a buttonhole. And so this would be on the chain with your pocket watch, and the watch fob there that had a little heft to it to keep the chain from tangling. Interesting thing is these things were used both to wind the watch, which I presume had to be done either every day or multiple times a day to keep good time, and also the end of these iron ends on here was what you would use when you open the front of the pocket watch. There was often a little nub there that was shaped like the end of this, and so you would stick that in there and turn it to set the hands, so you wouldn't push the hands with your finger or risk snapping them off, but you would actually put this pocket watch winder down on that and use that to set the hands as well as wind the watch. Anyhow, so that's something that we've probably all dug one of. There are a couple different styles. There's one that kind of looks to me like a gas valve style. It's kind of got like a T shape or an L shape, and those are very old. Those are early 1800s pocket watches, very expensive watches in their day. But these are kind of like late Victorian era inexpensive ones. And of course, you had to have the watch winder that fit the size of your particular watch. So they were made in different sizes. Anyhow, I'll show a couple of pictures of some other pocket watch winders now so that you can see different styles. The Federal era had tons of different styles of these items, so it's pretty amazing to see all the different styles. And speaking of pocket watches, typical finds include pocket watch bezels. This one took a plow strike, but you often find the outer rims of these. This is probably a later date pocket watch, early 20th century. The kind that had the crown on top here that moved to wind the watch, of course, did away with the need for the key to wind it. And so, yeah, we find a lot of these. I'm sure you've probably found one as well, but that's what they are, and they're diagnostic according to the crown on the top. You can also find the crowns detached, a little item that has a little reeded edge that's round. If you find that, that's probably a detached crown from a pocket watch. Another loop that you may have found is something that looks like this, has a broken piece off there. Often this side of it is a little thicker than the other side. You notice that it's oval and not round. These are the loop end of a brass key. So I just want to show everybody that broken brass key. This item is also a loop. It's a loop of lead. This is a pair of Civil War era lead knuckles. You would put your fingers through there, and it's diagnostic to see this piece that's kind of T-shaped back here. That would have been longer. It's very plow mangled, but that's exactly what that is. FYI, sometimes people carved their names into these. I have one from a camp in Kentucky when I dug in Kentucky that has the name carved in. I think that this may be a pair of brass knuckles. It's an old piece of cast brass. It's very thick, and the fingers fit perfectly in these loops. It's exactly identical on both sides. There's not a rounded side and a flat side, and you can see that it has been finished because it has filing marks there. So it's a very old technique for finishing cast brass. And so, yeah, I think this is another piece of, in this case, brass knuckles instead of lead. Another loop or clasp that people will find or clip is these. These are from Corsets. They had an iron band that went down, and all these little brass things went into little eyelets or buttons on the other side. A typical corset had a lot of different ones of these. They went all the way up and down the garment, and so they're pretty common finds on earlier sites. I generally just clean the iron attachments so that I can put them in a display case. So very neat item there, but that's exactly what they are, and I'll cut away and show you a photo of a non-dug example right now. I know we've all probably dug these. They come in all kinds of different sizes. Often an iron attachment there, which you can see. Many different styles and shapes. And they always have this brass loop with a screw thread here. These are terrets, T-E-R-R-E-T, and they are horse stuff. So basically the reins went through here to keep them from becoming tangled or falling. And often there were two of these terrets. One was generally on the saddle, and one was on the hame, on the horse's collar. And so often you can find matched sets of these. These were from the same site, for example, identical ones, probably from the same pair. So I have to assume that they were likely, a lot of them were purchased in pairs, but probably lost individually. So that's horse equipment, and the horse reins pass through there. People also call them rein guides, but that's what they are. For a change of pace, here is a silver loop. This loop has a little beveled edge that you can see right on either side. And it looks a lot like an aluminum link from a chain link fence or something similar, but you can just kind of tell how silver tarnishes in the ground after a while. And this is definitely silver. This is a very early earring, probably I would guess, late Victorian or early 20th century. It's unmarked. It's not stamped sterling, so it probably dates to right before 1900 whatever, whenever the Silver Marking Act came into being and things were required to be stamped. But that's what it is, very early silver earring. We've probably all dug these items before. These are lead pieces with the double iron loop there. These were links that went into a chain pump for a well. And so basically every so often on the chain link there was one of these, and this lead would help to draw the water up as you crank the crank at the top on the chain. And so I will cut away here and provide a diagram of what these would look like in action. We've probably all dug a clasp or a clip that looks like this, or at least many of us have, especially folks who dig in sites that date to around the Civil War or just after. This is actually a piece of a leather valise. It's a strap end. So there would have been 3 attachments here. They always have countersunk holes. And the leather strap would have actually gone in here in this slit in the back. And then that attachment would have held that there. And this actually threaded through a very long bag that was almost like a carpet bag. It looked like a blanket roll bag, but it was made out of leather. And then there was a little button that passed through here and presumably turned so that this wouldn't come loose. So that's what those items are. They're a neat piece that didn't last very long. It seemed like it's kind of Civil War and Reconstruction era find. So they're a neat relic, and I'm going to show you a picture of an original bag here from the mid-1800s. So when you hear people talking about carpetbaggers and so forth, you know, a lot of folks traveled with these types of leather valises that were kind of treated, I assume, with oil to keep the water out and to repel rain. So pretty neat bag and pretty neat find. We've probably all found some loops that look like this. I think most people would probably recognize this as the strap box of a spur, kind of a military style spur here, and the boot strap would have gone through here to hold the spur on the boot. So I think most people would recognize that, even in its broken state, and not think it's like a kepi buckle or some other type of buckle. But the arm of the spur was attached right here where the brake is. And of course, these are thick cast brass items, and often they have filing marks. FYI, spurs were actually made flat, completely flat, all the way across, and they were finished flat, and then they were bent into shape. Kind of an interesting fact that probably not everybody knows. These pieces you've probably found. You might have just found that much of it. But you might have found part of the arm. But these are late 1700s, early 1800s, Federal era, roughly, civilian spurs. They are very thinly constructed spurs. They are cast brass and finished, but they are pretty thin. So if you find one of those, you know you're on a pretty old site. And then last of all, you may have seen pieces like this and thought, well, that's kind of some sort of agricultural piece or farming piece or whatever, but these are actually the bootstrap ends, strap boxes of military spurs or similar. The spur arms would have gone out like that, and then the neck would have been, you know, facing the camera here. So the straps from the boot went vertically down, just like they do on the strap box that has a center bar. But in this case, they just went straight down through those. But that's what they are. I'm going to throw up a couple of photos here of some different types of spurs that you all can see. There's some excellent books on spurs, a couple that I would recommend by Dorsey and others. So the answers are out there if you are interested in spurs, or if you're hunting a spot where you're digging a bunch of pieces like a burn site or similar. But that's what those are, so do save them. They are good period finds. Another find that people will probably recognize is this find. We see a lot of these items that can be broken at various points. This one is complete up to the attachment. This one is broken off at the attachment here. But these are thumb loops from chamber sticks. A lot of people call them candlestick loops. Yeah, a chamber stick did hold a candle, but a candlestick back in the pre-Civil War days, I find these finds, I tend to find these more at colonial and pre-kerosene era sites, because after about 1855, when kerosene really started to take over, people very swiftly moved away from candles and went towards kerosene because it provided more light, and it was not expensive, and it was a better option for them. So that's why we see kerosene thumb wheels starting about the 1850s and going on, you know, lantern pieces, wick pieces. But these earlier sites, I think, have a lot of these chamber sticks. The difference between a chamber stick and a candlestick is that a candlestick really was made to sit in a room and not be moved. So a candlestick had a very heavy base. Here's a piece of like tomback looking material. It's a solid base. It's been plow struck and broken, but this is very heavy. So this is probably was broken off of a large candlestick base that was meant to just sit in a room, because they weren't meant to be moved. And they had a very heavy base so that they could not be tipped over very easily and start a fire. Then you have the chamber stick here. This is period 1, which has this thing to eject the candle out, so we can eject it after the candle had burnt completely down. You may find these little buttons too. They are a part of this. These often get, these brass plates and tubes get destroyed by the plow if you're in a plowed site. But of course, here is that that attachment, and you can see it's almost a dead match for the example that I have. Pretty cool. Okay, so there's the chamber stick, and then last of all, the oil lanterns. The bases on those were often marble or granite or stone of some sort. So you can see this would have been a square base, and it had a little hole here that there was probably some sort of a brass piece or iron piece that went up through to hold the base of the oil lantern, the kerosene lantern. And again, these were very heavy because you didn't want your lantern to tip over and start a fire. So there's a fragment of one of those from a field. Another interesting brass loop item. I think a lot of the brass rings that I find are pieces of horse tack. I suspect they're from bits or various pieces of horse tack. This, I know for a fact, is a piece of a mid-1800s brass bit. So this would have been on the side of the horse's face, and there would have been one on the opposite side as well. So that's kind of an interesting item. That's the only one of those that I've ever dug, but I may have found, you know, pieces that I wasn't able to identify, you know, if it was just like a piece broken off or something. But that's what that is. Kind of an interesting find. We've also seen a lot of loops and things like these. A lot of people just call these sword hangers, but they were also pieces of horse tack that had these types of closures on them. And so these came from two different fields. You see they almost match, but I know they're not from the same item. But there is what some people would call a sword hanger, but not all of these were sword hangers. Some of them were horse related. And then here's an actual sword hanger. This wouldn't look like much but a twisted up piece of wire to some people, but that's a Richmond style sword hanger. Dug in a field, so you can see that. I'll maybe put a picture of that up now so that you can see what that looked like. All right, and there's an interesting little brass loop here that I wanted to show everybody. This has two little attachment points on it, and it's got a design. Somebody finding this might not even know that it was once a loop, but I just wanted to show you all this because I've dug them before. I find them more in the deep south and elsewhere, but there were lanterns that were advertised as hurricane lanterns, or in the north, skaters lanterns, and they were small little lamps with a little thumb loop on them, thumb wheel, and they just held kerosene that burned up here. They had often a brass globe that went on top that was connected with a little piece of wire that was connected here. You can see where that globe is missing. But it was a brass globe, and I assume they were called skaters lamps because people could ice skate with them and see their way in the dark, and that the wind created, the breeze created from ice skating wouldn't blow the flame out because of that brass covering here that just had holes poked in it. And so in the south, they were often called hurricane lamps or skaters, or planners lamps. But you can see that this thumb loop here is a similar width and design and everything. This whole lamp is made out of tin, so it doesn't really survive except for the thumb wheel and the wick advancer inside that piece. And then of course this loop was made out of a thick cast brass or die stamped brass, just for sturdiness, so that it could support a full, one of these that was full of kerosene. So that's exactly what those are. When you find these little loops, that's what they're from. And they seem to have been popular kind of Civil War, late Civil War era, Reconstruction era, on up into the early 20th century, as this example is probably early 20th century. Kovacs, it says, which is probably, I would guess, even the 20s, 30s, 40s. In Louisiana, of course, because we were really slow to get any sort of electricity across our state to every home, and because we have a lot of hurricanes, people kept kerosene lanterns around, so you find these in the sites in the 50s, 60s, 70s even, pretty commonly, because people wanted light in their homes if a hurricane hit. So that's what those are. While we were on the topic of these planners or skaters lamps, I just want to show you one that my wife had dug. You can tell that it's just, the bottom was, this one was all brass, but the bottom of it was tin, much like this one is just kind of a colored brass plated tin, but this one's tin all the way through. But you can tell that this one was brass all the way through. Missing the top, but of course we could identify it because it still has that thumb loop, which is so recognizable. You know, I think that this is actually the same darn design as that one. Yeah, same exact design. And that's from a spot that was around from colonial times on up through about 1930s or so. So just wanted to show you that. It's a flattened skaters or planners lamp. And this is an interesting item, gilded often, just made of thin stamped brass. I used to think that these were men's sock clips, but it appears that they could have either been on socks or garters. But at any rate, the same kind of an idea to hold those things up, since there wasn't elastic invented yet. So there was no way to hold them up aside from literally wearing a belt and having these hang down and adjusting them so that they held them up lengthwise. So there would have been a little button that slid down into that held either your socks or your garters up. And men did have sock clips, sock clasps like these as well to hold up their dress socks. So interesting item. Okay, one of the things that I'm sure we've all dug is these little bitty tiny rings, these little bitty brass rings. Now, I'm not quite sure, but I have a suspicion about these. And my suspicion is that they went on suspender clips like this and hung down in these actual clip spots. That's just my suspicion about these. Perhaps somebody could confirm or deny. You know, the suspenders you know, in and of themselves are pretty amazing because there's just an endless variety of different types of these. A lot of times you'll get them when the tongue here is broken off, or they're broken or tossed out in some way. You can find ones that have Masonic emblems like this one, patented in the 1850s. Very thickly constructed, beautiful suspender clip. The variety of these is endless. I mean, absolutely endless. Here's one that says the Anchor Brace. They all had quality names that were associated with them, or so forth. Many different patents issued, many different designs issued. Here's one that says Russell Manufacturing Company with some sheaves, basically a bale of wheat or hay there. Just tremendous variety. But I have a hunch that these rings, you know, went on those clips on suspenders. And another loop that we may have all found before is something that looks like this. Notice that these designs are pretty common here. This kind of rib design up the sides here. This wishbone look here is very diagnostic of these items. These are actually the bases of brass stirrups. Okay, so the foot would have gone through here on these, and those would have been the inside bottom of the stirrup and the outside bottom of the stirrup here. And just to show you what that would have looked like, here's a complete one. These are pretty old, but you can see this rib design here. Often when they're broken, they get flattened by farm equipment, so you can see that that's pretty much a match. But that's an antebellum brass stirrup there, very old, wonderful find. You may also find the loop at the top here where the leather went through. So some more loops to identify. These are always thick cast brass because they had to hold up to the rigors of horseback riding. All right, so I just wanted to say, if this video has been useful to you, please definitely leave a comment below and let me know. And I also wanted to say, if you'd like more content like this of identifying finds, then go ahead and like this video and comment and say, please do some more with identifying finds. You can also reach out to me on Instagram at BuckleBoyLA, and you can leave a comment here if you'd like to get in touch with me or you have a find that you'd like identified. All right, thanks for watching, everybody. Take care.